Are we recording? I think we are recording. All right. We are recording. All right, we're going to give this a shot. I know the lighting's not great, but we are going to try to record a recording. We're in the classroom here trying to get a recording up for our federalism and state and local government. So this will be our lecture for federalism and state and local government, doing this for both our online and some of our recently quarantined seated students. So thank you for joining us for this impromptu lecture on federalism, state and local government. We also have a guest lecture for some of our students that we normally use for our online classes. But for our online classes, this will be an additional lecture. For my seated classes, this will be a supplemental lecture mostly for the students that were not able to attend our in-person lecture in these past couple weeks on federalism and state and local government. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, nope, hold on. Share my screen. Let's see, presenting. Here we go. Are you seeing that? Okay. Hopefully you are seeing my slides right now. This looks different to me. So again, this will be a test of this new setup. Share content. Yes, share content. Yes, I want you to share the slides. Okay, seems to be presenting. Okay, so we're talking about American federalism and state and local government. So this is two chapters in your book that we're combining into one unit because they're similar in topic, different sections, but we're going to combine them into 1 week's conversation. But they are broken up in the sections. We'll start talking about federalism, continue our conversation on federalism, and then end the lecture with talking about state and local government. So in general, to shorten the topic, American federalism, including state and local government. We're talking about division of powers, the evolution of American federalism, the relationship between state and local government. We call that intergovernmental relationships between governments. Competitive federalism, kind of where we are today in the relationship between state and local government. Advantages and disadvantages of federalism, and then talking a little bit about state and local government, which I need to add on to that overview. These are our learning objectives for the week. So what do we mean by federalism? Federalism is simply the sharing of power between a state and local government. These are most governments throughout the world have a federalism, a type of federalism in place where there's some sort of power sharing between a state and some type of state and local government, and that is the general definition of federalism. Don't get confused. People often think of federal, they see that federal and they think of national government. But remember, when we're thinking of federalism, when you add that ism to it, it's the relationship between federal and state government. And it's really, when you're talking about having strong federalism, it's having striking the right balance between state and local government. So when you think of, people often get confused when you say strong federalism. It's kind of the opposite of what your mind naturally goes to. You think of strong federalism, you often think of strong national government, but it's really the opposite. When you want to say strong federalism, that's pulling against the tide, which is normally to have a stronger national government. And it's really to have strong federalism is to push more power back down to the states, ensuring that states still retain some power. Because as we've learned throughout the course, it is natural for large entities, for entities that have power, to try to get more power, to try to gain more power. So there's going to be a natural tendency for the federal government, the large national government, to try to gain more power, and in a federalist government, the way our Constitution is set up, it is meant for the states to retain, to reserve power for the states. So in our strong federal government, we want to ensure that states do retain some of that influence and power. So there are three main types of democratic institutions that you might have throughout the world. We've had two of them here in the United States. So most countries throughout the world have either a unitary or a federation style of government. In a unitary style of government, you have the national government is the primary source of authority, and that national government will then give authority down to its lower tier, its state governments or its territorial or its district governments. So it's the national government that is formed first, and then it forms state governments, territories, districts, and the like. This is what you'll see mostly across Europe, Japan, so England, the UK, Japan are the two biggest examples. Most of Europe is a unitary style system. You'll notice that many of these unitary systems often have a higher power that grants the national government. So many of them start out as monarchies, as UK and Japan are good examples of. So they some higher power will grant the national government authority, and then that national government grants authority down to its lower tiered governments, the states or territories. Then you have a confederation where the states are the initial holders of authority, and those states then grant authority kind of up to a national government, but the states retain their primary authority. And it is the states that then grant some level of authority and power to a national government, but it is the states that are the primary governing power in that arrangement. You might recognize the Confederation from American history. We had two instances of Confederation. The Articles of the Confederation was the first attempt at an American style of government. The Articles of Confederation were a loose band of states. So the states were the original form of government, and then they granted power to a weak national government. But it was soon realized that national government didn't have enough power to do the things that the states wanted the federal government to do. And then also the Confederate States of America, when they broke away from the United States, they wanted states to have significant amount of power. We would recognize that argument from the letters that those states sent to the Union government when they broke away, when they seceded from the Union. They would have talked a lot about slavery and wanting to maintain their slaves, but also states' rights, wanting to maintain the rights of the states, because they saw the states as being the primary governing power, and the national government being secondary, because they were a confederation. There are some existing confederations, mostly in South America. Switzerland is a confederation of states. These are mostly smaller countries. Most large countries have not been able to exist as a confederation. What makes a federal government different is that it is its authority is granted not from a national government or from a state government, but its authority is granted from the people And the people then grant authority to both a national government and a state government at the same time, that they have coexisting authorities in a more equal status, so that one is not the states, the national government doesn't grant power to the states, and the states don't grant power to the national government. They independently have power granted to them from the states, because originally the states were elected, the state legislatures were elected by the people under the Articles of Confederation and then under their own constitutions. And then it was those elected legislatures that then ratified the U.S. Constitution. And so it was the people through those state legislatures that then ratified the Constitution, giving authority to the federal government. So both of which were given their authority, both the state government and the federal government, given their authority by the people. So those are the differences between a federation having its authority given by the people to both state and national government at the same time. Let's talk a little bit about, we've mentioned this a number of times in our conversations about the Constitution, and we have enumerated powers given to the federal government in the U.S. Constitution, and then reserved powers. This is coming from the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, powers reserved for the states. Any powers not enumerated in the U.S. Constitution are reserved for the states. And then there are many powers, again, going back to the checks and balances that are inherent in this U.S. Constitution, there are many powers that are concurrent, that are shared between both state and federal government. So what are some of those powers? So obviously, some of the enumerated powers for the federal government are things like making war, declaring war, foreign policy, making treaties with other governments, trade, international trade. Now, but also trade between states, which we called interstate commerce. But one of the important things that are reserved for states, a lot of things involving business. So intrastate, trade between states, or no, trade within a state. So most things to do with business and intrastate commerce is going to be reserved for the states. Most things involving business, and you'll read in the book, up until interpretations of the Commerce Clause greatly expanded federal influence on business. Most things involving business and commerce were reserved to the states, very much on purpose, meaning purposely meant to have healthy competition between the states. And so when you think of contracts, licensing, registering your business, those are all things that happen at the state level. Those are all reserved powers for the states in general. Minting money, that was obviously one of the big problems with the Articles of Confederation, was that each colony minting its own money became a problem because there was out of control inflation. So minting money became incredibly important to be a national enumerated power. Of course, making laws becomes a concurrent power. We have national law being made by the U.S. Congress, but then, of course, state laws are made at the state level. What are some other concurrent powers? How about taxes? The federal government collects taxes, but also state governments collect taxes. That has to happen at both levels. We have courts. We have both federal and state courts. federal courts, enforcing federal laws, state courts enforcing state laws. Some of the other things that are important that just the states do. How about elections? Our states reserved for this. Actually, this isn't a reserved power. This is actually an enumerated power for the states. So this is where the title, we collect them all into reserved powers for the states, but there's a couple that are actually enumerated for the states, and one of them is elections. The Constitution actually says that states will conduct their own elections, that even federal elections for president are conducted by the states. So that is a power that is clearly delineated to be for the states. And then also, of course, ratifying changes to the Constitution. Only states can ratify those amendments. Of course, it is the federal government that makes the amendments, and then it is the states that ratify amendments. So in concurrent powers, you can add changing the Constitution because it takes both federal government and state government to make those changes. So those are some of the differences between federal, state, and government and how they have to be working together. These checks and balances and the work of federalism that happens, the working together that has to happen, that's inherent in our system. Okay. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of federalism from the founding on. You should have watched a video from the U.S. Constitution Center with Thomas Jefferson talking about his thoughts on federalism from the beginning, even before the U.S. Constitution was ratified, and through the first a couple decades, well, probably 3 or 4 decades of the country under the U.S. Constitution. And you can see that even he believed that federalism, states' rights were being eroded from, even from the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But then we entered into a stasis of what we call dual federalism. So this is what we often think of as the layer cake model, when there was kind of clear delineated lines between what the national government, the top layer of the cake, the national government had responsibility for. And then below the national government was state governments had a pretty clear idea of what their responsibilities were. And then below that were local government. So national government was responsible for going to war, collecting national taxes, the Supreme Court, those kind of national things. And then state government was responsible for business and licenses and interstate commerce and those kind of things. And then local government was collecting trash and local utilities and water and the like. And that existed for a very long time. We wanted the country, as in general, wanted the states to be responsible for those things happening, the daily commerce, the day-to-day running of things at the local level, and the federal government being responsible for foreign entanglements, for foreign policy, for dealing with the really big problems with international issues or big corporations that trade throughout the country and throughout the world, breaking up monopolies and the like. And that continued on fairly well as the country expanded, as the population expanded, until we hit 1930 and the Great Depression. Because then the Great Depression hit, and it became clear that the federal government had to act. And why was that? Because the federal government is the only entity that can print money. Again, going back to one of the advantages or one of the problems with the Articles of Confederation and the advantages of the U.S. Constitution is that it put all of the ability to print money in the federal government. When we were in dire straits during the Great Depression, we needed to put people to work and print money. The state governments did not have the ability to stimulate the economy like the federal government was able to. And in doing so, the federal government created new programs, new administrations, new agencies, and greatly increased the role of the federal government in the everyday lives of Americans, and greatly shifted the power of the federal government vis-a-vis the states. So shifted the balance of power between federal and state government. And as we learned, as we have learned in our reading, it is very difficult to shift power back once power has been given to one entity. So that's where we see this this change from dual federalism to cooperative federalism, and we see a new growth in federal programs that give money both to the states and to individuals. Provides welfare programs and retirement programs that had previously, if they existed at all, existed at the state level. And that existed until the 70s and 80s, until there was a pushback, and conservatives in this country under Nixon and Reagan tried to push back and try to push some of the responsibility and authority back down to the states. And there we entered into an era that's known as New Federalism, which we really saw a lot of block grants, where the federal government, instead of saying that these programs would spend money in this way, it more sent money in blocks to the states and said, states, you spend this money in the way that you see fit, so that there would be new authority and kind of getting the decision making and spending back at the state level, and then we see that go for a couple of years, but again, it is only mildly successful. Again, the federal government had taken so much power, and then you even see almost another reverse of that in the late 90s after 9/11, with the creation of the second largest federal agency, with the Department of Homeland Security, and the federal government getting even more involved in the lives of Americans through the many programs involved in the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the No Child Left Behind initiatives, where the federal government's getting even more involved in education, which again is another purview that had previously been almost solely left up to the states. So we still largely say that we live in an era of cooperative federalism, with some recent shifts into new federalism and competitive federalism, where the states and federal government are almost competing for more effective programs, and being and having states and federal governments competing to have the better programs available. So now let's take a shift. That covers most of what I want you to know about federalism for this test. Again, we'll make sure to watch the videos that we have and do your reading. But I want to talk a little bit about the structure, institutions, functions, and some of the key elected officials that you'll find in state and local government here in North Carolina. First, the institutions. So let's think of state and local government, just state and local. Some of the key institutions that you have in state government are going to be very similar to what you see in, or are going to be somewhat, I shouldn't say very similar, be somewhat similar to what you see in the federal government, so in big blocks. So you have an executive kind of branch of institutions, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. So let's think about the executive side of folks, of institutions. So you have the governor's office, much like the president is the chief executive of the state, but unlike the president, he doesn't sit alone atop that, isn't the lone executive atop the executive branch. Here in North Carolina, much like the president and vice president were separately elected before the 12th Amendment in the early United States, the governor and lieutenant governor are separately elected here in North Carolina. So they are often of different parties. But there also is a slate of 10 other statewide elected agency heads that lead their own agencies and are elected statewide from the population of North Carolina, just like the governor is. And they collectively lead a committee called the Council of State. And so the governor leads the Council of State, and is the governor, leads the state. But there are some decisions that have to be made, not by just the governor, but by the entire Council of State. So there are some decisions that are made by committee as opposed to just by the governor. So you have the governor, you have his cabinet agencies that he appoints, and then you also have the statewide agencies that are run by their own elected officials called the cabinet of state. I'm part of the Council of State agencies. And then you have a number of boards and commissions that do oversight throughout the state that are appointed by both the governor and the state legislature. Then you have the legislative branch of the state, which is housed in what's known as the North Carolina State Legislature or the North Carolina General Assembly. They're both the same thing, just two different terms for the same body. North Carolina State Legislature and the North Carolina General Assembly. We have a bicameral legislative body, just like the U.S. Congress, so meaning we have two houses of the state legislature, a North Carolina State House and a North Carolina State Senate. Similarly to the State House and U.S. Senate. So we have a slightly larger State House and a smaller State Senate. And similarly to the U.S. Senate, the lieutenant governor is the president or the head of the Senate and also of the State Senate. He also, similar to the vice president, has very few outlined roles in the state constitution. He basically leads is like the tie-breaking vote and leads the state senate and takes over if the governor is incapacitated or dies, but doesn't have any other real duties other than that. So that he often takes up pet projects. He or she often takes up pet projects and finds a way to keep themselves busy. So that's the legislative branch. The judicial branch of the state government, we have three major court systems. You have the state Supreme Court, state appeals court, and state superior court. So the Supreme Court covers the entire state, and then we have districts for the appeals court and superior court. So if you're appealing a state case, you will appeal to the appeals court district in your area. And if you're going to trial for a case in North Carolina court, it will go to a superior court district in your local area. And then so that's the institutions of state government. Then how about over on the local government side? We have two major institutions. We have county government and then municipal government, city government are the two major institutions that you'll see. And we'll talk more about those in a moment. What are the different functions that you see between state, city, and municipal government? So at state government level, you'll see things like obviously state law, but of course you'll have regulations and decisions that happen at the county level and the municipal level. Also across the board, at every level, you have taxes. You have state taxes, county taxes, which usually come from property taxes. If you own a home, you're paying your property taxes to the county. And then if you live in a city, you'll pay municipal taxes, often through water or sewer pickup is how you're usually paying your city taxes. And state taxes are often through income taxes, and we also pay a fuel tax. Our transportation taxes are paid for by a fuel tax or business taxes that we still have that are currently in the process of being phased out if that continues. Also, the state controls the National Guard. Obviously, the counties and cities don't have something comparable to the National Guard, but we do have law enforcement that goes across the board. We have state police at the state level, sheriff's deputies at the county level, and local police at the city level. You also have prisons that exist at the state level. Those are state prisons, state kind of correctional institutions. That's where you go if you're going for a long time. If you have ever experienced the criminal justice system, if you've ever gone to, spent overnight in a cell, if you ever gotten in trouble with the law, if you ever known anyone that's gotten a DUI or, been arrested and spent a couple nights in the slammer, they probably went to a county jail. That's where most people are held temporarily and are held awaiting trial. That's usually done at a county jail. The difference between a jail and a prison. Transportation is going to happen at both the state, county, and then you have city buses and the like. Health. Every county is going to have a health department, and social services happen at the county level. Then, of course, the state runs kind of Medicaid and Medicare services. We're going to have state hospitals, mental health hospitals, and hospitals for the disabled, and run large programs as well. Then most utilities are going to be happening, as opposed to, except for electric is mostly private, but most of your kind of other types of utilities are going to be happening at the county level. So those are some of the functions that are going to be happening. Some at the state, many at the county, and then some at the municipal if you live in a city. Now, there's some of the elected officials that we have. This will be the last thing that we'll talk about, finishing up this this lecture on state and local government and federalism. Some of the statewide elected officials. So obviously we have the governor, the head of the state of North Carolina. Here is Roy Cooper right now. The lieutenant governor is Mark Robinson. Our governor is a Democrat. Our lieutenant governor is a Republican, which is very common in North Carolina these days. We're a very purple state, and we often have a Republican legislature, a Democratic legislature, and a Republican governor, or vice versa. And same with the governor and lieutenant governor. And then we have the members of the Council of State, which you'll see from Attorney General down to Superintendent of Public Instruction. Those are the independent Council of State members who run their own agencies and are elected independently statewide. Then, of course, every person is, depending on where you live, is going to have a member that represents them in the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. And then you'll also have we have Supreme Court justices that are elected statewide, and then you will have a district appeals court justice and superior court justice that you will also vote for, because our justices are elected here in North Carolina. They're also partisan here in North Carolina as of 2016, which is a new development here in North Carolina, and is not uncommon, but is not I mean, it's probably, I'm not positive how many states, something I need to look up, but not all states have partisan judgeships. I think it's fairly rare that states put a partisan Republican or Democrat next to their judges. So the officials that are elected at the county level, there's really three, or actually four, but not one per county. But per county, you have county commissioners. So this is the board of commissioners, usually a 3 to 7 member board that's elected to run the county. Then you have a board of education, again, a 5 to 7 member board of education that runs the school system in each county, and then every county elects a sheriff. You also have a district attorney, but sometimes they cover multiple counties, but they are elected. And then a city, if you live in a city, you'll elect a mayor and a city council. city council person. And sometimes that city council will appoint a mayor, and sometimes you elect a mayor directly. There's a couple different styles there, but really just know that at the municipal level, your elected officials will be a mayor and city council. So that really covers what we want to talk about here for state and local government, and federalism. Federalism, again, being the relationship between state and our federal and state government. We've evolved through a number of, I mean, we've kind of moved from a dual federalism model where the states were really in charge of most regulation and where the states had significant control, to now a more cooperative federalism model where the federal government definitely has more control. And then we talked a little bit about state and local government, what the functions, institutions, and elected officials are. So I hope this helps a little bit, especially in studying for the test. Make sure to use these slides as a study guide, and look forward to seeing you guys in class or online soon. Have a great day.